You're watching A1 Storyteller, where truth walks, raw and unflinching, into the soul of every story we tell. For over 100 years, if stories could speak through generations, this one would rise above them all. It begins with a single moment, a sidewalk, a uniform, and a punch that should never have been thrown. A moment so charged, so devastating, it tore through the quiet of a city and forced it to confront the difference between the law and justice. The locker room is dimly lit, concrete walls sweating with heat. Officer Tyler Madden, 38, methodically straps on his gear, bulletproof vest, badge, radio, cuffs. His fingers move with military precision, each motion echoing the control he exerts on the streets. He checks his service weapon twice, like he always does. Once for safety, once for war. Tyler's face is carved in stone, cold blue eyes, military haircut, a 5 o'clock shadow that clings like bad memory. His record is clean, commendations line his file. But under the surface, he's a man clinging to a fading worldview, sharpened by legacy and fueled by fear. His upbringing was a cocktail of old-school policing and inherited resentment. Raised by a father who was also a cop and who never hesitated to call neighborhoods like Carver Square a no-go zones, Tyler learned early to distrust what he didn't understand. To him, force equals order. Compassion, weakness. We don't ask questions, Tyler, his father used to say. We act. Or we don't come home. In his cruiser, Tyler listens to a conservative talk radio host spit venom about the war on police. He nods to himself, jaw clenched. As he drives past a black teenager on a bike, his eyes flick automatically to the kid's waistband. Suspicion is reflex. Suspicion is reflex. Assumption is instinct. He never admits it, not even to himself. But Tyler sees the world through a filter. One where certain people, certain clothes, certain postures signal trouble, not because of fact, but because of training. And that training was never written in manuals. It was spoken in locker rooms, passed down over beers, and reinforced by silence. Tyler turns down an alley to cut through to the edge of Carver Square. The sun is setting, shadows stretch long like arms, reaching out. He doesn't know it yet, but tonight, the street will hold up a mirror, and he'll have to answer to the man staring back. Carver Square isn't just another patrol sector. It's a history lesson Tyler never cared to learn. It's where the 1963 race riots began after a teenage boy was killed in custody. Where black veterans returned from war only to face redlining, job discrimination, and police surveillance. The community remembers, even if the department doesn't. But for Tyler, the past is irrelevant. All he sees now are the statistics, skewed, dehumanizing, and convenient. And so every time he cruises through this part of town, his hand hovers just a little closer to his belt. His eyes narrow a bit more. His tolerance wears thin faster. Tonight, the radio crackles to life. Suspicious individual reported near Lenox and Vine. Black female, early 40s, walking alone. No description of threat. Caller just said something felt off. Tyler grips the wheel. Lenox and Vine. Deep Carver Square. No backup. No second thought. He hits the siren once. Just a chirp. Enough to startle. Enough to remind the street that he's watching. He sees a black woman, mid-40s, in jeans and a navy blouse. No bag, no visible weapon, just walking with purpose and quiet authority. She doesn't flinch when the cruiser slows behind her. Doesn't speed up. Doesn't break eye contact when he rolls down his window. "Evening, ma'am," he says with practiced calm. "Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" Her response is composed, clipped, for just walking. Tyler doesn't like the way she says it. Not scared, not submissive. No apology in her tone. To him, that's resistance. "You got ID?" She tilts her head slightly. "Am I being detained?" That's when the shift happens. Not in her, but in him. Tyler's pulse ticks up. The script in his head switches from protocol to control. He steps out of the cruiser. Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful order." She exhales, quietly, but it's the sound of centuries. Centuries of being questioned, stopped, doubted. She says nothing, just turns slightly, enough to show she's not a threat. And that's when Tyler loses it. Without warning, he lunges, grabbing her wrist. She recoils. In his eyes, it's defiance. In his world, defiance justifies force. One fist clenches, swings, lands. Her knees buckle. She hits the pavement. Time freezes. A child across the street screams. A phone camera blinks red. A streetlight buzzes overhead like a warning siren from heaven. Tyler breathes hard, eyes wide. He doesn't see a threat anymore. Just a woman lying on the ground, and suddenly, a crowd beginning to gather. He can feel the eyes, the phones, the shift. What he doesn't realize yet is that this wasn't just any woman. This was Chief Cassandra Wright, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city, his boss, his superior, his reckoning. A sharp gasp moved through the air as she hit the ground. The street around her stilled, as if the neighborhood itself couldn't believe what it had just seen. She wasn't bleeding, at least not visibly, but there was a bruise already blooming across her cheek like a slow thunderstorm in the skin. Her jaw clenched. Her hands remained still at her sides. She didn't scramble, didn't beg, didn't even cry out. The woman who had just been punched by a uniformed officer slowly, deliberately, began to push herself up from the pavement. Tyler Madden stood frozen, his knuckles still tight, the heat of the strike still humming in his arm, his breath caught in his throat. The internet was already digesting the moment before the department even had a chance to blink. One of the officers stepped forward, asking Cassandra if she needed medical assistance. She waved it off. "I'm fine," she said, though her cheek told a different story. Still, she wouldn't let anyone see her wince. That kind of vulnerability wasn't something she could afford in this uniform, in this moment, in this skin. Another patrol car pulled up, sirens off, lights still flashing. Lieutenant DeWitt stepped out, visibly confused at the scene in front of him. He caught sight of Tyler on his knees, Cassandra standing above him, and the crowd circling like a slow-moving storm. His eyes moved fast. Calculation, damage control. "Chief Wright, are you? He started. She didn't look at him. "We'll secure the scene," she said flatly. "We'll debrief at headquarters." DeWitt blinked. "Yes, ma'am." The crowd wasn't dispersing. If anything, it was growing. People were filming from the balconies. One woman had climbed onto a mailbox to get a better angle. Within minutes, the incident would have been clipped, filtered, subtitled, and shared across every platform. It was no longer an act of misconduct. It was a symbol. Cassandra turned, walking toward her unmarked vehicle, the bruise on her face beginning to purple under the glow of the streetlights. She didn't limp, didn't hesitate. Tyler remained on his knees, unable to look away from what he had done, not just the act, but the assumption. He hadn't just struck a civilian. He had struck power. And not power in the traditional sense. Not male, not white, not familiar, but a new kind of power. Full. One he didn't recognize, and because of that, one he didn't respect until it was too late. Back in her car, Cassandra sat for a long moment before starting the ignition. She looked in the rearview mirror, not to fix her hair or examine the bruise, but to watch the officers behind her. Tyler was still there, speaking to internal affairs agents who had been dispatched almost instantly. His shoulders had sagged. His voice had lost its bark. But the city hadn't quieted. Word was spreading. The woman who had taken the reins of a broken department just got assaulted by one of her own men. Not during a protest, not while undercover, but because someone called 911 about a suspicious black woman walking alone. The truth was, it wasn't just about Tyler. It was about a system that had taught him to see threats instead of people, a culture that applauded aggression over understanding, a city that had never asked itself who it was, really, protecting, and why. Cassandra had known, deep down, that change wouldn't come through policy alone. That's why she was there that night, walking those streets, to see what her officers saw, to feel what her community felt. But she hadn't expected the system to lash out at her directly, not like that, not so blatantly, and yet it had, without hesitation, without thought. Because it didn't see her uniform, it only saw her skin. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights hummed like an old, bitter tune, familiar, stale, and unwelcoming. The air carried that strange mix of old coffee, printer ink, and something colder, shame. Cassandra stepped through the front doors, the murmur of nearby officers dipping into an uneasy silence as soon as they noticed her. Eyes turned quickly away, posture stiffened. No one quite knew whether to salute, apologize, or disappear. The bruise on her face said everything her words hadn't yet. Her words hadn't yet. She walked past the reception desk without a glance. Every step echoed like a gavel, calm and deliberate, but vibrating with the kind of restrained fire only a woman with power and pain could possess. Behind her, Officer Tyler Madden was escorted inside by 2 internal affairs agents. His badge had already been surrendered, his belt stripped of weapon, baton, and radio. He looked smaller without the gear, like the authority had drained out of him the moment it was no longer handed to him without question. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from the unraveling of the world he thought he knew. In the briefing room, Cassandra stood before the command staff. 12 high-ranking officers, nearly all of them men, many of them white. They sat straight-backed but uncomfortable, as if unsure of which version of this story they would be forced to believe, the version on paper or the one broadcast across the city's screens. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her voice was sanded smooth, low, and firm. What happened tonight is not an isolated event, she began, letting her words fall with the weight of law. It is a reflection of what this department has allowed to live in its bones. A few glanced around. One shifted in his seat. Gu. Another pretended to take notes. None interrupted. I didn't come to this office to be a figurehead. I didn't wear this badge to decorate a website or smooth over tension with public statements. I came here to serve, to change. And change, real change, doesn't ask for permission. In a corner of the room, a TV screen silently played the looped footage of the incident. Tyler striking her falling, the crowd reacting. The image was grainy, but clear enough. The silence in the room deepened. Tyler, now seated alone in a glass conference room adjacent to the briefing space, looked like a man caught in the ruins of his own reflection. He watched Cassandra through the glass, saw the people he once commanded now hanging on her every word. He had never realized how much power could exist in quiet, in poise, in truth. Across town, neighborhoods buzzed. The clip had gone viral. News outlets were already writing headlines that turned her name from a title into a movement. Black mothers in Carver Square clutched their daughters a little differently tonight. Young men who had long lost hope in any justice wore new expressions, conflicted, guarded, but curious. And inside Cassandra, past the steel and leadership, something else stirred. Grief. Not for herself, but for every name that hadn't gotten this spotlight, for every bruise that never made it to the screen, for every life assumed guilty before being given a name. She turned back to her staff. There will be reforms, immediate ones. And if that means cleaning house, we clean until the walls shine with truth. The officers said nothing, but some nodded. Cassandra didn't wait for applause. She didn't need affirmation. She had something better, clarity. She was no longer asking to be heard. She was claiming the room. Tyler sat in the small interview room, the ticking clock loud against the sterile walls. His hand stayed clasped, unmoving, wrists marked by tension. Across from him, the internal affairs investigator placed a recorder on the table, pressed a button, and began asking questions. Each one was met with a pause longer than the last. Tyler's voice was flat, clipped, mechanical. He described the stop, the moment of suspicion, the decision to use force. His tone never shifted. He didn't try to justify it, nor did he offer regret. He just spoke facts as he saw them, each one colder than the last. Outside the room, a hallway buzzed with restrained activity. Cassandra passed through without looking in. Her face was calm. Her steps were steady. Officers who once joked in her presence now turned silent. At the far end, a civilian liaison waited for her, carrying reports of calls, community questions, media requests. Cassandra listened without reacting. Then she nodded once, took the report, and moved forward. Cassandra returned to the neighborhood where it happened. The same street, the same cracked pavement, the same quiet tension in the air. This time, though, she wasn't alone. A group of community leaders walked beside her. Ministers, teachers, store owners, parents. No cameras followed them. No press releases were issued. It wasn't a spectacle. It was an acknowledgement. Residents peeked out from porches and windows. Some stepped forward, cautiously, watching the woman who had once been the subject of rumor now walk among them in silence. A little girl holding her father's hand pointed toward Cassandra's cheek, whispering something too soft to hear. The father gave a small nod, not of approval, but recognition. Cassandra looked back at him, gave a subtle gesture of understanding. The past few days had not softened her, but they had sharpened her focus. She asked for nothing from these people, not trust, not loyalty. She asked only for space to keep walking. At a nearby community center, chairs were arranged in a wide circle. The windows were open, and the breeze carried the dull hum of distant traffic. Cassandra sat with the group, her uniform jacket folded neatly beside her. She spoke with the same measured tone she'd used at the precinct, but here the cadence changed slightly, less command, more weight. Around her, people shared what they'd lived through. A teacher recalled how her students had learned to keep their hands raised long before they were taught multiplication. A barber talked about watching his son get stopped 3 times in 1 month on the same block. A pastor said he no longer knew what to tell, grieving families beyond repeating the names. Cassandra listened without interruption. She didn't take notes. She didn't promise change in sweeping terms. She didn't give timelines or policy drafts. She only said, "I hear you," and meant it. Later, as the group dispersed, she stayed behind. One of the mothers approached quietly. Her son had filmed a video that went viral. He hadn't spoken much since. Cassandra asked if he'd be willing to meet. The mother nodded. The boy appeared from the far wall, phone in hand, unsure whether to look up. He was no older than 16. Cassandra didn't speak right away. She sat beside him, and they stared ahead at the basketball court outside the window. Eventually, he spoke, not about the video, but about how he thought no one would believe it. Cassandra said nothing in return, just listened. When he finally looked at her, his eyes asked a question he didn't say aloud. She offered no answer, just a slight nod that said, "You were right to film it." Elsewhere, the city's conversation had shifted, not just about the punch, but about what led up to it. About what kind of lens an officer carries into the street. About how fast a decision can erase a life. At City Hall, a hearing was being scheduled. Voices were beginning to organize, not in protest, but in policy. Departments from other districts started asking questions, not hostile ones, curious ones. Leaders from other precincts called her office. A few congratulated her restraint. Others admitted discomfort. Some said nothing but began reviewing their own procedures. Back at headquarters, the mood had changed. Officers walked straighter. Conversations stopped when she entered. She didn't demand silence. It just followed her. Not out of fear, but adjustment. Officers who once bragged about control now considered presence. A few had started volunteering for community patrols. A training program was being quietly rewritten, not to avoid another incident, but to recognize the cause of the first one. Tyler, remained on leave pending investigation. He hadn't spoken publicly. His union had issued a short statement, but within the department, he was no longer seen the same. His absence wasn't felt as a gap in leadership, but as a crack in the foundation. Cassandra didn't speak his name in briefings, not out of avoidance, but to focus attention forward, not back. In a quiet office, Cassandra stared at her own reflection in the glass of a photo frame. Behind her, the city moved. And for the first time, not all of it was moving away. None of them meant as much as a single flower placed without fanfare by a child who had only seen her from a distance. She thought of Tyler not as a villain, but as proof she didn't hate him. That was too simple. She pitied the uniform that had taught him how to act, but never why. And in that quiet moment, with the day just beginning to rise behind the buildings, she made a promise, not to herself, not even to the city, but to every name on that wall, that no silence would ever protect this department again. The sky over the city hung low, heavy with cloud, the kind of gray that made even the brightest buildings look faded. Cassandra walked through the precinct parking lot without speaking, her coat trailing behind her in the wind. She declined the official car today. No driver, no sirens. Just her, walking, head high, eyes fixed ahead, every step a quiet refusal to forget. News vans lined the opposite side of the street. Some tried to call out to her, but she didn't slow down. Cameras tracked her like prey, lenses twitching with urgency, desperate to turn her silence into spectacle. Inside the precinct, the air felt different, colder, almost still. A thin layer of uncertainty sat over the room like dust. The officers who had once nodded at her out of habit now did so out of hesitation. Respect had taken a strange new shape, one sharpened by discomfort. Not one dared to speak first as she passed through the bullpen, where cases once filled whiteboards and radios chattered without rest. Everything had quieted since that night. On her desk sat a folder, unmarked, sealed in red tape, the internal affairs report. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she turned to the window, watching the street below, where people passed by unaware of the decisions being made above them. She thought of all the mornings before this one, how many times she had walked into this building carrying the hope of reform, the belief that change could come from within, and how each day had tested that belief, stretching it thin, bending it under pressure, until finally it had snapped, on a curb, under fists, beneath disbelief. She hadn't planned to speak at the hearing. Her presence was meant to be symbolic, an image of recovery, of calm, of protocol. But something had changed, not just in her, in the way the department looked at itself, in the way the city looked at them all. The silence in those meeting rooms wasn't just tension anymore. It was waiting for something honest. Well, something real. When Cassandra arrived at City Hall, the building buzzed with more than just civic noise. The hearing chamber was full, press, community members, department brass, even a few retired officers sitting shoulder to shoulder with activists. She walked through the aisle like a thread passing through cloth, stitching together worlds that rarely sat in the same room. Every step reminded her of the bruises still healing beneath her skin, of the moment when the man who wore her badge had looked at her and seen nothing he valued. A clerk called her name. She stepped forward. The microphones whined slightly as she sat. Her badge gleamed under the overhead lights. She didn't read from notes. She didn't ask for permission. Her voice rose steady, filled with memory. "Well, I know what it feels like to stand on both sides of the line," she began. "To wear this badge and be trusted, and to wear this skin and be feared. I know what it is to carry authority and still be seen as a threat. And I know how fast that balance can shatter." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Not with challenge, but with certainty. What happened to me wasn't just about one officer or one mistake. It was a window, and everyone saw through it. The room didn't move. Not a cough, not a chair creak. For years, this department has claimed progress, diversity training, community engagement. But when it came down to instinct, to reaction, to what a trained officer saw when he looked at me, none of that mattered. Not the uniform, not the rank. Just skin, just silhouette. A man in the second row lowered his eyes. A woman reached for her daughter's hand. And if that's what happened to me, imagine what happens to the people with no badge, no title, no second chance. Cassandra leaned forward now, her voice quieter, but deeper. This isn't about discipline. It's about discipline. It's about disease, one we inherited, one we've protected, one we've called just the way things are. But I will not carry that disease anymore. I will not train others to survive in it. I will not ask my community to trust something that doesn't trust them back. A murmur moved through the chamber like a breeze before a storm. I'm not here to be the face of reform. I'm here to say the time for symbolic change is over. The time for real accountability has come, not with press releases, but with consequences. And then she stopped. No dramatic ending, no applause line, just silence again. But this time, it felt full. Heavy with understanding, she stepped down from the podium. Behind her, a row of officers sat motionless. One reached up and removed his hat. Another looked straight ahead. Another looked straight ahead, blinking hard. Cassandra returned to her seat, the echo of her words still hanging in the room, not as sound, but as gravity. Outside the chamber, the hallway was quiet. Cassandra stood near a pillar, her arms crossed, not as a god, but as someone shielding herself from the weight of being watched too closely. A young officer approached her, not someone she knew well. Maybe 2 years on the job at most. He looked nervous, his fingers flexing at his sides like he was rehearsing what to say. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked just slightly. "Oh, Mom, I just wanted to say I saw what happened. I mean, not just the video, but how you got up, how you handled it. And I didn't know what to feel at first." Cassandra turned her head, not interrupting, just waiting. "I joined this job to do good. But lately I've been scared. I'm becoming someone I don't recognize." She didn't give him answers. She didn't tell him it would be okay. She just said, "Keep asking yourself who you're becoming." And then she walked away, leaving the words to do their work in his silence. Back at the precinct, the fallout had begun. Not the kind made of press or scandal, but the quiet unraveling of routine. Patrol briefings were different now. Conversations were more cautious. Some of the old jokes didn't land anymore. Officers who once laughed at discomfort now stared at their notepads when certain topics came up. A new form of awareness had settled over the department. Not enlightenment, but unease. Tyler's locker had been cleared out. Not officially. His nameplate still hung above the door, but the contents were gone. No one said where. No one asked. The silence around his absence was sharper than words. There was no talk of defending him anymore. Only the kind of distance that people build when they know too much but say too little. Cassandra stood at the back of the roll call room that morning, watching the sergeant give instructions, his voice firm but different. Less swagger, more restraint. She could feel the room measuring her presence. Some with guilt, some with fear, some with relief. When the briefing ended, she stepped forward, saying nothing, just making her way to the board. She picked up a marker and crossed out the patrol zone where the incident happened. Then wrote a new designation, a community foot patrol supervised. The room stayed silent, no objections. A few eyes dropped to the floor. In a modest house across town, a family sat together in their living room. The mother held her phone, watching Cassandra's hearing speech for the second time. This time with her son, the same boy who filmed the video. Didn't say anything. His fingers were wrapped tight around the armrest. When the video ended, the mother didn't ask what he thought. She just rested her hand over his and whispered, "You helped change something." He didn't answer, but his shoulders eased, just a little. Meanwhile, a reporter from a local outlet drafted a piece not about the scandal, but about the history behind it. She pulled records, scrolled through decades of complaints, disciplinary files, body cam clips. What she found wasn't shocking, just consistent, a pattern. A truth people already knew but rarely saw printed, that what happened to Cassandra wasn't a break in the system. It was the system working exactly as it had been designed. Her editor warned her the story might stir things. She submitted it anyway. Later that week, Cassandra received a package wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Inside was a faded black and white photo of her great-grandfather in uniform. Buffalo soldier, 1918, his gaze unbroken, his hands at his sides like steel. Tucked behind it was a note, written in simple block letters. You're not the first to carry this weight, but maybe you'll be the last to carry it alone. She placed the photo on her shelf, just beneath the city's award for distinguished service. The contrast between them felt brutal and necessary. As days passed, changes began to root. A community oversight committee was formed, not as a gesture, but with real power. Subpoena, budget input, direct access. Cassandra insisted on it, not to build trust, she said, but to repair what had already been broken. The mayor resisted at first. She didn't flinch. And for once, the public backed her louder than the council opposed her. One evening, Cassandra visited a school on the east side where she'd once done outreach before she made chief. The students there had watched the video, talked about it in their civics class, debated whether any of it would matter. As she stood in front of them now, the energy in the room was different. No wide-eyed admiration, no nervous respect. Just cautious eyes waiting to see if she'd speak to them like a cop or like one of their own. She told them the truth, that she had been afraid when it happened, not of pain, but of confirmation, that everything she had worked to fix was still rotting beneath the surface. That even in power, she wasn't protected from being reduced to a threat, that every choice she made afterward wasn't strategy, it was survival. The room went quiet. A student in the back, a girl with her hair pulled into tight braids, raised her hand. If that officer knew who you were, would he have stopped? Cassandra looked at her, not with answers, but with grief. A maybe. But that's the problem, isn't it? That night, Cassandra sat at her kitchen table with the lights off. The only glow came from the street lamp outside, casting a slow amber pulse across the wooden floor. She hadn't eaten. The untouched plate sat beside her, cold now. In her hands was her father's old journal, one she had found in a box after he passed. It was filled with pages of tight handwriting, police jargon mixed with personal notes, moments of fear couched in professionalism, dreams tucked between duty rosters and arrest records. One entry caught her eye. We serve a city that does not always see us, but we still serve. Because if we don't, who will serve us? She read the line again. Then again, and something in her chest tightened, not from sorrow, but from the realization that his question was still unanswered. That decades later, despite the titles, the councils, the ceremonies, no one had served her when it counted most. No one had stepped in when she was down. She had stood alone, and that knowledge ached deeper than any bruise ever could. Somewhere across town, in the heart of the community where the incident occurred, murals had started appearing. Not grand or polished, just painted walls with words like a truth, a dignity, and a breathe. On one, someone had painted a silhouette of a kneeling officer in front of a black woman rising, not with fists, not in violence, but with her head unbowed, her hands open at her sides. Beneath it, the words, "Respect is not silence, justice is not apology." Cassandra visited that mural just before dawn. She wore plain clothes, no guards, no photographers. She stood there quietly, unnoticed, until an elderly man pushing a cart looked over at her. His eyes narrowed, then widened with recognition. He didn't speak, but tipped his cap and kept moving. That single nod felt heavier than any standing ovation. At headquarters, the final vote on the oversight reforms had passed. Narrowly, but it had passed. Cassandra didn't celebrate. She simply got back to work, signing off on new disciplinary procedures, sitting in on implicit bias audits, reviewing body cam footage without flinching. The department was being reshaped, and she wasn't building it for comfort. She was building it to last. Tyler, now officially dismissed, had not spoken publicly since the event, but word reached Cassandra that he had left the city, moved back home to a small town 2 states over. Someone mentioned he had enrolled in a restorative justice program. She didn't know whether to believe it. She didn't need to. Justice for her was never about his redemption. It was about the space his failure opened for truth to enter. She gave an interview months later, the first and only one about the incident. The journalist asked her, "Do you think this would have happened if you weren't black?" Cassandra didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had signed hundreds of policies, lifted fallen neighbors, written condolence letters to families who had lost someone in custody. She finally said, "It didn't happen despite who I am. It happened because of it. So, why? And that's what makes it bigger than me." The interview ended there. The camera cut, but the silence remained in the studio. The journalist didn't speak as Cassandra walked away. No handshake, just a quiet, heavy pause. The kind that only truth can leave behind. Weeks later, Cassandra received a letter from the governor's office, inviting her to lead a statewide task force on police ethics and racial accountability. She stared at it for a long time. Not because she was honored, but because she wondered, how many people had to bleed for that envelope to arrive? She accepted, not with joy, with resolve. At the first task force meeting, she stood before leaders from every district in the state. White, black, brown, uniformed and civilian. She didn't start with statistics. She didn't cite studies. She said, "I was assaulted by one of my own, and that didn't break me. What almost broke me was how long it took for the rest of you to say it mattered." There was no applause. Only a long stillness that spread like fire catching dry leaves. She continued, "You want to fix this? Then stop managing the story and start facing the truth. Until every officer knows they are accountable not to the shield, but to the people they serve, nothing we build will stand." Later, after that meeting, a mother who had lost her son in a police shooting years before approached her. They had never met. The woman looked into Cassandra's eyes and simply said, "I prayed someone would feel what we feel. You felt it and you lived. Now make it mean something." Something. Cassandra hugged her. The kind of hug that breaks down armor. Months passed. The city changed, not overnight, but undeniably. Recruit training programs required community endorsement. Body cam footage was reviewed, not just internally, but by third-party panels. Officers walked beats again, not to intimidate, but to talk, to listen, to learn. Cassandra visited schools, not for publicity, but because the children still asked the hardest questions, and she owed them answers no one had given her. One day, as she left a school assembly, a little girl ran up behind her and tapped her gently on the back. "You." Cassandra turned, crouched down, and smiled. "Are you the lady who stood back up?" the girl asked. Cassandra nodded. The girl pulled something from her pocket. It was a sticker, a gold star, a gold star. "I wanted you to have this," she said, placing it on Cassandra's jacket. Cassandra swallowed hard, nodded again, and stood. In that moment, she didn't feel like a chief, or a survivor, or even a symbol. She felt like someone who finally had been seen. She sat at her desk late one evening, the precinct half empty, the lights dim to a low hum. Outside her office window, the city moved slowly, as if its pulse had been tempered by reflection. Cassandra flipped through the file of a new recruit, the kind of file she once would have scanned quickly, looking only for credentials, commendations, red flags. Now she paused over every line. Birthplace, family background, community involvement, not to judge but to understand, to ask herself the question no one had trained her to ask during her own rise. Would this person protect every life as if it were their own? Even the ones that didn't look like theirs? The knock at her door came soft, almost hesitant. It was Deputy Chief Melina, eyes rimmed with fatigue, but holding a folder with steady hands. She stepped inside, and Cassandra gestured for her to sit. Melina placed the file down and opened it to reveal photos from a recent internal training drill, images of officers and role-play scenarios designed to test bias under pressure. One picture showed a white officer pulling a black teenager from a fake storefront. Another showed hesitation. Delay. Conflict. Cassandra looked up. They froze, Melina said. Even after all the workshops, the new curriculum, the immersion exercises, they still see threat first, not context. Cassandra exhaled deeply. It was a truth she had learned in the most brutal way possible. That training alone couldn't undo centuries. That fear wasn't always personal. It was programmed, taught, inherited. We're not failing them by pushing harder, she said slowly, or we're failing if we stop pushing. The conversation shifted. They spoke of new directions, bringing in trauma, informed community leaders, therapists from underrepresented neighborhoods, restorative justice experts who could speak the language of both hurt and healing. Cassandra proposed something bold. Every officer would be required to spend 1 week per year, embedded not with fellow cops, but with civilians affected by past misconduct, listening, witnessing, documenting what they learned, not to fix them, to unlearn themselves. Meanwhile, at a small cafe downtown, a group of activists met to discuss the department's reforms. These were not people who gave praise easily. Many had been marching long before the viral videos, before Cassandra's name meant anything. But as they spoke, something shifted in their tone, not approval, but cautious hope. One woman, who had lost her brother to a botched raid 10 years earlier, held up her phone and played a clip from Cassandra's latest community address. In it, Cassandra said, "Reform means nothing if it only makes people feel safer on paper. It has to change the moment someone sees blue and doesn't instinctively reach for the fear in their chest." The room sat in stillness for a moment. The woman turned her phone over, her voice low but firm. Ishi gets it, not just the facts. The feeling. Across town, the young officer who once approached Cassandra in the hallway sat alone in his apartment, replaying the memory of that night again. Not the night of the assault, but the night after, when he sat in his car for hours, wondering what he would have done. Had he been the one to respond first? Would he have intervened? Would he have believed her? He thought of the fear in her eyes, muted, restrained but real. Not fear of pain, but of betrayal, of erasure. He picked up his journal and wrote a single sentence. "If I ever freeze, it better be from courage, not confusion." Not confusion. The next day, Cassandra met with the Civilian Oversight Board for a quarterly review. Their questions were sharper now, but rooted in purpose. She welcomed them, encouraged them, urged them to dig deeper. For the first time, the relationship didn't feel adversarial. It felt like a balance of power finally finding equilibrium. They brought up the new transparency dashboard, showing live updates on complaints, response times, and officer commendations. They discussed the upcoming youth advisory panel. They asked what success would look like. Cassandra didn't hesitate. When our officers feel safe enough to admit when they're wrong, and when the community feels heard before they feel hurt, her words weren't rehearsed. They came from the marrow of lived truth. Outside, the city kept breathing, slowly, unevenly, but breathing. Because someone, somewhere, had finally stayed on the ground long enough to listen. Cassandra stood at the edge of the neighborhood block where it all happened, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the sidewalk, stained with memories. Children now played near the spot where she had once been thrown to the ground. Their laughter echoed through the space like a kind of quiet victory. An older woman from the community approached her, hands weathered, eyes bright with something between sorrow and pride. She didn't ask for photos or say much, just reached out, touched Cassandra's shoulder gently and whispered, "We watched you rise." Cassandra felt her throat tighten. It wasn't just that justice had moved, it was that healing had started. Not because of anyone's action, but because the pain had been seen, named, and held out in the open without shame. In that moment, Cassandra didn't feel like a chief or a victim. She felt like someone who had become a bridge between two sides that never truly knew how to face each other until now, standing not above them, but among them, broken, open, and still choosing to lead. Across 20 keynotes, we followed a journey that began with violence and ended in transformation. Emma. We witnessed a woman, stripped of title in a single heartbeat, who could have chosen vengeance or silence, but instead chose to rebuild. Not just systems, but trust. Through humiliation, institutional betrayal, and public scrutiny, Chief Cassandra Monroe didn't retreat. She rose, not for applause, but because standing was the only choice left when kneeling was not enough. We saw how trauma echoes far beyond the moment of impact. How justice isn't a courtroom verdict, but a living, breathing commitment carried in every decision, every reform, every risk. This was never about one officer, one incident, or one apology. It was about the weight of generations pressing on the back of one woman and her refusal to collapse beneath it. The story peeled back the polished surface of power to reveal its fragility, how quickly protection turns into profiling, and how those entrusted to serve often forget who they're serving. Yet in the ashes of that truth, Cassandra built something lasting, not a legacy of pain, but a framework for accountability, empathy, and change. This was the story of a woman who became the bridge she never had, the reckoning she never received, and the answer to a city that dared to look away. And through her, we are forced to ask, who do we see when we look at each other? A suspect? A stranger? Or someone worthy of being heard before they're harmed? If this story moved you, if it made you pause, look deeper, or feel something you can't quite shake, then don't let it end here. Like, comment, and share this with someone who still believes justice wears a single face. This is A1 Storyteller, where truth doesn't flinch, and neither should you.